Software supply chain security. In this section, we're going to be discussing the essential parts and the reasons why software supply chain security is so important to software development organizations these days. Remember, in earlier modules, we discussed the fact that software is composed of not only the code that developers build, but the third-party dependencies that they use to do their job, right? It helps expedite what they do. And the thing is, 99% of the Fortune 500 companies utilize open source software. Actually, all software out there is actually composed of third-party software, free and open source software that makes up 85 to 90% of the software that you produce. And the thing is that there's issues with it. There are actually security threats and issues. And you'll hear the term CVE, right, which is vulnerability and exposure. JFrog, we are a CNA, we are a CE number authority, and we produce these CVEs. We make sure that the software components, the third-party false transitive dependencies the software developers are using are safe and secure because it's on a constant rise. We've seen over the years the number of packages that have exploits or vulnerabilities or exposures in them has grown year over year. And how do you provide a platform to companies that you're dealing with to help ensure safety and protection of the software they produce, but not only from a financial aspect, because we see this all the time, that when we're looking at these things, that software dependency models is the equivalent of, a developer going out and finding a USB key with some library, some stuff on it. You don't know what it is, right? You do a pip install, go get npm install, docker pull, whatever it is for the pulling from these three-party sources is basically the equivalent of finding a USB key that you find on the street and plugging it into your production server. But the thing is that companies need to protect themselves in terms of vulnerabilities and exposures because it's not just a financial burden that can be placed on the company, loss of revenue and things like that, but worse, loss of reputation. If I lose my data to because of a software vulnerability to a company I use, I am going to be generally skeptic of that company going forward because they put me in an awkward position. And since we're saying that, how do you go ahead and protect yourself as an organization? So we see these headlines all the time, right? And your developers are aware of it. Security people are aware of it. The thing is that these exposures and these leaks and these potential threats and issues are happening constantly. There's always malicious packages that can possibly disrupt your organization by leaking your data or doing things like that. So understanding this, how do you protect yourself? And when we talk about JFrog, we talk about managing the entire software supply chain from your developer or shift left. We'll talk about that all the way down to your runtime. And when we look at what we have here, this is a standard software supply chain. You have a developer. A developer is building a piece of software. He uses third-party transitive dependencies from remote sources, people he doesn't know. He or she doesn't know, I should actually say. Right? Pulling in these sources to do what they do. They build their software to make their job easier, but we also don't want to have it so that they put a lot of burden in place for them to have to go and investigate all these things. Let them do their job. Be creative. They're artisans. Their code is their craft. The mediums they choose is the language they choose in order to enable the things that they're doing. And so saying this, you look at it, they build software, they put it into a location, Artifactory in this case, they use CI servers to build the software itself. They might do UAT testing, some other, QA testing. It might go into a staging environment, then to a production environment. It gets deployed as a web service to a device, to your customers. Whatever the software does, it all falls in line like this. And if you look at the red components here, these are all susceptible areas as a developer in which your company can be possibly affected by these issues. And when we look at all the potential threats that happen in the software supply chain, it's incredible. Whether it's malicious packages from these third-party transitive dependencies, it might be a 0-day, something you've been using. Look at Log4j. It disrupted so many industries, and it was used everywhere. But when that vulnerability was found, the disruption was immense across. Or SolarWinds. That was the one that rocked everybody. It affected 18,000 organizations globally. Or is there an exploit, right? A CVE that might be a potential threat. It might be something like as simple as a code injection or something, or a cross dependency, or lots of other things that can be potentially threatening there too. What about secrets? This is a huge one. We're going to talk about secrets as part of our advanced security product. But with secrets, the biggest thing here is, we did scans of Docker images in Docker Hub, and we found that a majority of them had some sort of secret, whether it's an API key, an access token, whatever it is, you're actually giving the keys to somebody who could be potentially nefarious or malicious that could actually attack your organization based on stuff that you accidentally gave them. Also, misconfigurations. That's a huge one. We have the ability in our platform to detect misconfigurations of certain applications or services like Nginx. Did you remember to enforce TLS when you instantiated the service? Are you using Terraform? Did you remember to turn off authorization equals none? So all your ACLs, all your access controls all work properly. Also, too, have these been tampered with? Binary spoofing, typo squatting. These are all things you'll hear all the time in the software supply chain industry, and they affect corporations a lot. And millions upon millions of dollars is spent every year trying to protect organizations. And on top of that, all the way down to production, your runtime. And here at JFrog, we're going to have runtime security for things like Kubernetes to make sure you're not actually exposing any potential threats that could disrupt your organization. So when we look at the software supply chain, there are so many potential threats and attacks, and organizations know this. But how do you consolidate it? How do you bring it together so you have complete end-to-end software supply chain security that is both automated, manual, and also to runtime enabled? So when you look at this, these are all the potential threats that can potentially hit a company. Think about this. Every single part of the software supply chain, the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, could be affected by potential security threats and risks. So if you look at what we do, and we look at an SDLC, right, you have code, you have build, test, and deployment. This is all your standard stuff. Now, if you employ Artifactory, our software, the Universal Binary Repository Manager, which we talked about earlier, this is a place where you can go ahead and store your builds and all the transitive dependencies, allowing you to have accountability, especially as a system of record for the software supply chain. This is huge. Being able to understand not only if you're affected by an issue, but where and the blast radius, what is it affected and how long have we been affected by it, is substantial. And these are things that come in the core Artifactory portion of the platform. But the thing is that you always want to make sure that you have every phase of your SDLC secure. And one of the best places to do this, and the most efficient place, and also the most cost effective, is of course they call shift left at the developer level. And the thing is that anytime you find any sort of potential security issue, say in production, it's 100 times more expensive to fix than it is at the developer. They are your frontline defense. So saying that, we offer things like we'll talk about today in the further lessons, things like FrogBot. FrogBot is our ability where you can connect it to an SCM, right, a source control management bucket, GitHub, or whatever. And every time a pull request is done, we can do a security scan on things such as the dependencies, static code analysis, things that we offer in the IDE, right? These are all things that can be done automated. We have IDE plugins for things like SCA, software composition analysis, right, or component analysis. And the thing is on top of that, we have SAST for our advanced security. But this allows developers to have that information readily available to where it matters most, where they can address it and address it properly. We have curation, which is like a firewall for the organization, a way to actually write rules to prevent things from coming into the organization as potential threats. And then, of course, we've discussed earlier our JFrog CLI, and the JFrog CLI has things like audit built in, where it can also audit any project at the developer's desktop or even in a CI build to pull that information out. So this way you could see any potential threats like secrets and CVEs and static code analysis. We also bring the same level of protection, and then we'll talk about X-Ray, which is our core security platform. This is where we do the software composition analysis. This allows you to go in and look at all the pieces that you're using and understand any potential threats or CVEs or exposures that might be happening with the third-party transitive dependencies that make up 85 to 90% of your software. We have advanced security that we're going to go over, where we have things like contextual analysis, how to reduce the time on investigation of these CVEs. Are you exposing any secrets, misconfigurations for things like infrastructure as code, or even services and application scans? Then we also have runtime for Kubernetes. Are you running something and being able to say, hey, by the way, a container in this pod in your Kubernetes instantiation somewhere in a cluster somewhere is running this potential nefarious piece. You're going to want to go and address it. And we even bring the security aspects down to things like distribution and connect as an extension of this through release bundles in distribution, where you can go ahead and scan an entire release bundle, which is a composite, as we discussed earlier, of actual software components into a single release. And then JFrog Connect, which pulls its libraries from, or builds from Artifactory into Connect to distribute to devices. And we offer security around things like firewalls to make sure there's no intrusion. So when you look at software supply chain security, just understand that JFrog has it covered from developer to device, from code to cloud. We have the aspects of shift left where it matters most through your entire CI process, all the way down, including things like ML models. We talked about ML ops earlier. We also do things around that. So the thing is that having that end-to-end software supply chain security protects organizations at every little aspect of their development needs, from code to cloud, developer to device. Come check out the software supply chain platform. Encourage your customers to understand that every piece of their software development lifecycle is a potential threat, and there is a solution for it. Thank you.